Hello, and welcome to the We Give Summit 2023. This session is Revolutionizing Fundraising, Grant Giving and Philanthropy, and Community-Centric Fundraising. I'm one of your co-presenters. My name is Michelle Shireen Muri. I'm the host of the Ethical Rainmaker podcast, where we dive into case studies around community centrism. We talk about the ways in which we should step into our power or step out of the way, and influences that are creating our sector for better or for worse. I am also a fundraising consultant with Freedom Conspiracy, and I am one of the co-founders of Community-Centric Fundraising as it is today. The Content Hub, the research that built the Content Hub, et cetera, part of that beginning of this amazing movement that's been catching fire. And my co-host is Rachel D'Souza Siebert.
Hello, everyone. I am very happy to be here today with Michelle. My name is Rachel D'Souza Siebert. I use she, her pronouns. I am the founder and chief purpose officer for Gladiator Consulting, a boutique consultancy located in St. Louis, Missouri, which is currently taking up Osage and Mississippian land here in the Midwest. I am also very proud to be one of the founding members of the Community-Centric Fundraising Global Council. So yes. Let's
get into it.
Get started. Philanthropy is problematic. Michelle, what have you been hearing in our sector these days?
You know, there are, first of all, I've been seeing a real lack of analysis around how philanthropy was created in the United States, how foundations were created, how nonprofits were created. I think part of that is because we get so into our work and the services that our community needs. And you know, the many folks who are waiting in line sometimes that are nonprofits, I know at least that's my experience, that we often are not bringing very much analysis. And when we're seeing decisions made, they're often, it's questionable in the United States, like how those decisions are made and by whom. For example, a lot of the decisions that we make in nonprofits, rather than being by the community and for the community, for example, in community funds or mutual aid or table banking, you know, those decisions instead in the US are largely made in sterile boardrooms with representatives of wealthy corporations, wealthy foundations, or individuals that have personal wealth, because our nonprofits put those folks in positions of power around the board, hoping that they will benefit financially and be able to move their services forward. But those folks usually don't represent the communities that we're intending to serve, which is a problem when we're talking about what solutions we should be pursuing and identifying what the problems even are. So that's one thing that I've seen. What have you been seeing?
Oh, friend, it's like, what do I not want to see? Honestly, you know, for me, I think across the country and with the clients that we're working with, what I'm seeing across our Slack platform with community-centric fundraising is really a few different things. First of all, this idea that, you know, we can't take risks in the nonprofit sector, that we can't actually truly set out to do something audacious or ambitious or innovative because we're scared about funding. We're scared we're going to lose our funding. We're scared we're going to disappoint our funders, that we're not going to live up to the things that we, you know, have named in our grant applications. And so we stay small, we stay siloed, we stay scared. And it really keeps our nonprofit organizations in this space of harm reduction, when really we know that there are an abundant amount of resources available to us to really change the systems and the relationships and the networks that really aren't serving us or, you know, marginalized communities. I think, you know, we've started to see the rise of this philanthrocapitalism. Like we cannot escape capitalism. And now we're seeing organizations foregoing a 501c3 structure and setting themselves up as an LLC. And they are still grant making. They are still putting resources that have been extracted from community back into community and in whatever ways they see fit, but the transparency isn't there. They don't have the same requirements in LLC as they do as a C3. And then I know you and I, we've had a lot of conversations about charity washing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, one of the truths, sometimes what I talk about when I'm talking about the history of nonprofits and foundations is the fact that a lot of the money that exists out there in the United States in our foundations, and sometimes from wealthy individuals, is made from extractive practices. And we are often not acknowledging harm, for example, that might continue. For example, if you're a nonprofit who has a corporate partner, a corporate supporter, and that corporate supporter is funding your work, they're, using the photo opportunities and the case studies and stories to promote and make their name look good. What we're often not willing to work with or not willing to see and talk about at our nonprofits or deal with and reconcile is the fact that that very same corporation may be extracting from our communities, may be oppressing our communities, and may actually ultimately be unhealthy for our communities. But if we're taking that money anyway, we're making them look good. So there are a lot of inquiries that can be made. Not everybody agrees on what would need to happen in that scenario, right? Some people believe, no matter where the money comes from, let's just take it and use it to benefit our communities. None of the rest of that matters. And other folks might believe that, where the money comes from really matters. In my work with Edgar Villanueva, he was one of my first clients when I became a consultant. And it's, for those who aren't familiar, Edgar Villanueva wrote a book called Decolonizing Wealth about Indigenous wisdom as applied to money and especially in the third sector. It's a brilliant book if you haven't read it. But he, when we were working together, we were making decisions about that money. And another way to look at it might be, are we willing, is the corporation in this example willing to have a conversation about their business practices? Can the recipient of that funding, maybe push a little bit or maybe have an honest or direct conversation about the ethics that are involved there? And, can there be any change made? And then maybe you make decisions off of that. But that's yeah.
I appreciate that. And I think one of the ways that has shown up in my work is really having to grapple with, you have a corporation that is willing to make a grant to a nonprofit organization from the dollars they allocate, from a C3 perspective. And then we go look up their election giving or their political action committee support, and we see a vast difference in values about where they are showing up in the community charitably and where their political dollars are going.
That's right. That's exactly right. Right.
So we have a big question today. What does it look like for fundraisers, these folks that are tirelessly working within their organizations and communities to organize resources? How do we interact with the system differently? How do we drive a different result than what we have been seeing? Michelle, as she shared, was part of the founding group that drafted what I think started out as 9, then 10 principles of community-centric fundraising. And I love this space in a movement where we get to be imaginative and we get to lean into abundance. And one of my favorite parts of preparing for this presentation was hearing Michelle say, I think there might be 11. So can you tell me 11? Can you tell me how you got there?
100%. Yeah. So community-centric fundraising, it's a content hub that was built based on research where we researched over 2,100 people across the US and Canada and some folks from outlying areas. And no matter how the data was disaggregated, thanks to Ana Rebecca Lopez, we learned that folks who are working in fundraising and nonprofits and even in philanthropy feel that the way that we do fundraising is extractive, it promotes white saviorism, and it's altogether uncomfortable with too many ethical questions, which also, points to why so many shops don't want their, silo their fundraising departments. Because they may not want to touch it, right? So community-centric fundraising, the original group of co-founders, we saw this data and we built a content hub that's been amazing. It's called, it's at community-centricfundraising.org. There's fresh content every week from people all over the world that are talking about case studies and sharing out, things that are going poorly, things that are going well, and different perspectives that we can use towards bettering our work. Community-centric fundraising is also this set of principles that are, yes, emergent. They're right here. You can also find them on our website, except for 11, which I'm going to be proposing in the fall. 11 being that, to do some of the work that we need to do for change, we need to commit to the work of internal, interpersonal, and interorganizational healing. And, we see that characteristic of competition, and my nonprofit is doing more important work than the rest of the nonprofits in this community. And really, what does it look like when we do that work together? Well, these principles are talking about how we might consider moving forward if we were to be truly centering our communities. Though we use the term fundraising, if you're a programs person, if you're working in a foundation and you're a gifts officer, or if you play another role within the third sector, these apply to you too, because you can just take, for example, principle 1, you can take fundraising and replace it with programs must be grounded in race, equity, and social justice, right? And so we developed and keep expanding the principles, with 11 being the newest one that I'm going to be proposing, because so often what gets in the way of the good work that we're doing is that we are, as my friend Christina Shimizu says, old beef doesn't age well, and we often are not working and bridge building with the other nonprofits that serve the communities that we intend to serve, which would be to the highest and best advantage to our communities.
Sure. No. And, I think, whenever we're working with clients here in St. Louis or across the country, there's so much excitement about engaging with the principles. How do I figure out how to do this work? I want to bring it into my development plan. I want to organize, giving around this. And then we get to principle 6, which is we treat donors as partners. And this means we are transparent and occasionally have difficult conversations. And I watch as the fundraisers, as the development committee, the board of directors, and the executive director are like, what do you want me to do? No. I mean, our donors are partners, but we tell them what they need to hear. We tell them what they need to know to keep giving to the organization. Oh, we don't challenge them. And it's like, okay, we cannot, as nonprofit professionals, continue to perpetuate behavior that doesn't serve us and doesn't serve our organization. And we've started to even see, right? There are studies coming out. Donors of Color Network did a fantastic study they released, I want to say, was it early 2022, maybe the end of 2021? We saw Bank of America and the Lilly School at Indiana University release a study on affluent giving. There is a shift happening with our donors. And we are starting to hear, maybe it's generational, maybe it's because of the shifts across the country, that donors don't want to be kept in the dark. They don't want to only hear the good stuff about your organization. They don't only want to hear when we're winning. They want to be in it with us. They want to understand, where their charitable gifts are going, but they also want to know what impact is being made. And if we are doing what we can with those funds, and if we don't have the resources we need, if we don't have the coalitions, if we don't have the relationships, what can they do to support those shifts and support those changes? And that, I would say I've been, in the fundraising profession probably for, close to 15 years, let's call it 15. And there is a shift, I think, generationally between what some of our older donors, or donors that have organized more assets and wealth, have come to experience in the sector with what some of our younger donors or newer donors who have been around and paying attention for the last decade or so. They want something different. They don't want to write a check. They don't want to come have your gross chicken at your sit down dinner where you're parading out, people to tell your sad story. They are looking for transformative change, and transformation doesn't happen when we're polite and when we're nice and when we keep things easy. And I really think we're at this moment, we keep hearing these terms about community-centric fundraising and justice philanthropy and trust-based philanthropy and movement building. This is all great and wonderful, but until we figure out what it looks like, we can't expect the sector to change.
That's right. No matter how much language we use, we are still building a palatable picture of how we should help, for our donors or how the nonprofit helps. And we're largely treating money and donors how we always have, which is continuing that cycle of power and the control of the wealthiest folks who might dictate solutions to our nonprofit or to the community around what the solution should be, and will maybe only fund that solution, et cetera. But as Principle 6, I facilitate a lot of groups around how we take idealistic principles into action. Principle 6 is the most popular because folks struggle with it the most. So part of the conversation is just having the conversation, in a situation like that, to discuss what's actually best for the community. Yeah. And, we're still coming up with the same tired solutions. And I think you're right, Rachel. I think you sent me a recent study that 48% of folks believe that nonprofits are on the wrong track, and only 1/3 believe that charities contribute a lot to society. But we also know that charities were created as band-aid solutions to problems that weren't being addressed in any other way. So it's part of a systemic issue.
Well, and also let's be honest that the policies that oversee charitable deductions weren't created with the success of nonprofit organizations in mind. They were created as a benefit to people who are trying to protect their wealth. So we have to have the starting point of the system that we're functioning in does not serve us. It was not built for us. And the practices that we adopt and, believe make us successful at our job, when we hit that goal, when we retain that donor, those aren't actually, I believe, the metrics that we need to be using to measure the success of our organization. And I think as fundraisers and as nonprofit professionals, we are in a moment. There's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of dialogue. There's, unfortunately, I think, a lot of strife. And I don't necessarily know that it has to be that way. But what is very clear to me is that we are in a moment where change is necessary. And that means it's time to get a little uncomfortable. And I know you and I have kicked around, like, what does it mean? Like me, little fundraiser in my organization and my community, like, how do I even get started? How do I even figure out how to bring these principles into my work? How do I introduce these concepts to a funder or to a donor? And I think you and I came up with some pretty good thoughts on what that actually, looks like.
Right.
The first piece of it is interrogating change. Like, we often pat ourselves on the back for solving the smallest problem or addressing the lowest hanging fruit first. And that's wonderful and great. And I don't mean to dismiss that at all. But if we were willing to start with the biggest problem first, we wouldn't avoid it. Right? We wouldn't distract ourselves with easy wins. We would want something really meaty and complex to dig into. And so if you feel like, at this moment in your organization, you're at a crossroads and you have an opportunity, like, I implore you, like, don't start with the easy change, because you will get that, burst of adrenaline and excitement about having made the change. And generally, organizations don't continue that momentum.
That's real. I also would say interrogate, when we're interrogating change, one thing that happened after the lynching of George Floyd, right? We all have seen it everywhere, corporations, foundations, or whatever. In every sector, people started talking about racial justice and racism, and we want to be an anti-racist organization, right? And in 84% of nonprofit staff are white women. So we are talking about, majority white folks who are running nonprofits, kind of scrambling to set up some values that didn't exist before, or at least hadn't been recognized in writing. And what I saw happening, and I'm sure this is the case for you in your consulting practice as well, Rachel, is that when folks want to make, feel overwhelmed with information, either they go to a numb spot, I can't move, I can't do anything, this is a lot of information, I'm overwhelmed, or the very other end of the spectrum, which is let's do everything all at once and we got to do it right now with such a sense of urgency, right? And for those folks who were in that urgency spot, like, oh no, we got to make change right now, we got to do everything right now, what are we going to do? Often what was happening is because they weren't taking that moment to like breathe as an organization, to really think about what does a process look like. I firsthand got to see folks just try to create a checkbox solution to make themselves feel better without actually creating real change. And so the question around interrogate change, I think you asked me once, is this transformative? Is it the same process you're using? Yeah, like it was for a lot of those organizations. Are you creating different outcomes? Maybe not. So interrogating like what we think is going to create change, and slowing down to see that, yes, there's a sense of urgency, and there should be around making our work and our vision and our values all into alignment around what the community is best served by. And we can't just like throw spaghetti at the wall and like want everything to stick and decide that our work is done now. There is no being done.
Well, and I feel like that leads into this idea about embracing experimentation. Like we are scared to fail in the nonprofit sector, and for good reason, right? Because if we might not do what we thought we could do, if something changes our plans, we may run the risk of losing our funding. That is scary. That keeps us safe. But when we stay safe, we don't change, right? And we need to get a little bit braver. That doesn't mean that we turn everything upside down, right, at one time. But that does mean we have the opportunity to talk to our donors, talk to our funders, float new ideas, have conversations, and you all are in relationship with your funders. You know who's going to be receptive and you know who's probably not. So in that space, start with the person with whom you're already in a transformative relationship with. Ask them if they are willing to try something new with you, and if they're aware of other funders or organizations who want to do this work differently and together, and try it. And you know what? You might fail. You might totally bite it. And now you have more information than you had before, which will inform your work moving forward, right? Like we need to get better both at sitting in discomfort and getting it wrong, because when we get it wrong, it builds an even stronger foundation for us to get it so right.
That's right. And it's one of the reasons that we don't experiment. One, we're afraid of failure, right? We're afraid of failure. We're obsessed with perfectionism. We are obsessed with competition. We are obsessed with, serving our communities as best we can, but don't always bring like a full analysis to that. And we also, in the realm of nonprofits receiving funding, many funding sources don't really allow for experimentation, right? So I would also encourage the interrogation of what is a metric and why does it matter and to whom. On my podcast, The Ethical Rainmaker, I've got currently two podcast episodes fully dedicated to really interrogating what value metrics have, who created them, why, how they can be useful, but also how they can be really damaging. So, one of the things that we do in the funding space is really keep nonprofits to a really high standard and really specific standard that may not be best for the community. And, that comes from white supremacy cultural characteristics. I'm sure that everyone watching, you've seen, that iconic piece around the white supremacy cultural characteristics. And they really show up in everything that we're talking about here. So if we have some awareness, for example, of that sense of urgency or that perfectionism or that type of gatekeeping and power hoarding and, competition, as we pay attention to what makes us more individualistic than communal, and we look back to our ancestors' ways of actually being what being in community really looks like, we must bring awareness to that. And, I know it might be easier for some of us. Rachel, I know you, as well as I, come from multi-ethnic backgrounds. And, part of that background is coming from communal cultures, so we can see it a little more clearly, maybe. than folks that don't have that multiple ethnic identities, including that communal culture. But there's so much wisdom there for us to see, and we can't get to it if we're adhering to these principles that we don't even know we're living in.
Right. And I think on that point, the last starting point that, we would offer is to find your people. Michelle and I have never met in person. We have been colleagues in the work and friends and professional soulmates now for almost 3 years. And I know that I can have hard conversations with Michelle, and that Michelle's going to give it to me real. Like, she's going to tell me when, I'm right on it and I need to keep pushing forward, or when I need to maybe pause and take a breath and, re-examine things. People aren't always going to be where you are. Like, there are gajillions of people interconnected in the nonprofit sector. We all bring different lived experience. We all bring different values. We all have experienced different levels of harm and trauma that we have or haven't dealt with. So when we talk about what it means to be, in the community-centric fundraising movement, I think it's important to know who your people are, who's going to be honest with you, who's going to be the board member or the volunteer or the community member or your staff colleague who's going to help you advance ideas within your organization, to push back on things, to know that somebody has your back. And this is not going to be everybody, right? Like, so there is this vulnerability and this audacity that comes into play when we look to build authentic relationships with people who care about our values and want to see these authentic changes happen in communities.
Yeah, I love the story of how we met. And I'm really excited to be meeting you 4 times this year. We'll see each other in person after having this pandemic long distance relationship and friendship that involves the personal and the professional and the hard conversations. We've been through so much together. So excited. Yeah. Later this year, I'm slowly working on an article about the beauty of finding your people and working in small groups, small accountability groups. There are a lot of examples that I've been lucky to be a part of, whether it's for me and, in the co-coaching models, or whether it's the many cohorts that I've been running lately. For example, Fleur Larson, who's called the White Woman Whisperer. Fleur Larson and I are going to release an 8-month-long 12-session cohort specifically for white women working in the third sector and adjacent to the third sector, where we're breaking folks down into small group work, intimate small group work, so that we can actually do really good work around accountability. This year, I'm just about to finish a cohort that was almost a year long with the ACLU, with several of their affiliates, where we, again, are doing work consistently in small groups in order to be able to have places to practice, to experiment, to fight that fear of failure, to work out our perfectionism, and to try to find the ways that we can make change by really being in close community with other people. So find your people. Sometimes that might look like a cohort. Sometimes that might look like some other type of small group and it might look like friends, right? Or professional friends. Like Rachel and I are definitely accountability buddies in several areas. So it can look a lot of ways, but finding your people is super critical.
Yep. So I'm glad to have been able to share this space with you today. We've had a blast being a part of the summit. Our contact information is up here, so please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. And Michelle, I wonder if you have any closing reflections or thoughts you want to share before we sign off.
No, thank you for having us today. Thank you for attending this quick fire session at the We Give Summit. We are thrilled to interact with you. If you want to look up more information about community-centric fundraising, just remember it's not all about fundraising. It really is about the way that we are moving in the third sector. The things that are damaging are good intentions. And I really encourage you to visit community-centricfundraising.org for more there. I would also encourage you to visit my podcast. If you're into podcasts, it's the Ethical Rainmaker. And you can find both Rachel and I and Rachel's firm Gladiator Consulting and mine Freedom Conspiracy on the web everywhere. Yeah, that's what I would say. I love working with you, Rachel, and I'm so glad that we've been able to have this conversation from our perspectives at Community-Centric Fundraising.
Yes, this was wonderful. I am grateful to you for founding this version of the movement. And we have a lot of work to do. So we
Yeah, we do.
soon.
Yeah, thanks for carrying the torch. All right. Bye.